Now to Hong Kong, where a fight broke out earlier in Parliament. There was fury from pro-democracy politicians after a pro-Beijing politician was elected as chairwoman for a key committee. It's meant to scrutinize bills and had been without a leader since late last year. The backlog of bills includes one that criminalizes mocking China's national anthem. And 15 anti-government protesters are appearing in a Hong Kong court charged over last year's mass rallies. The group was arrested in April, accused of helping to organize protests which were banned by the city's authorities. UN human rights experts have called for all of them to be released and for charges to be dropped. The first Hong Kong protester to admit to rioting charges was sentenced to 4 years in prison on Friday. Adrian joins us now live from Hong Kong. So tell us about what's been happening in court first today with these 15 pro-democracy campaigners, Adrian.
Well, Foley, I'm outside West Kowloon Magistrates Court, and this is where the 15 activists have been appearing before a magistrate during the past hour. We're not sure yet whether any pleas have actually been entered, but I think it seems almost certain that this case, because of its scope, will be referred to a higher court. Now, these 15 activists aren't just ordinary activists. They are figureheads, venerated figures of the pro-democracy movement. And they include people like Martin Lee, who's 81 years old, who has been part of the democracy movement now for half his life. He helped write Hong Kong's basic law, the Hong Kong law. Also there is Margaret Ng, another internationally respected lawyer, and of course Jimmy Lai, who is a media mogul here in Hong Kong, and his newspapers have been very critical of Beijing. Now, I spoke to some of these activists as they arrived here at the court. They were hemmed in by supporters and by the media, and they all insisted that they believed that Beijing was responsible for these charges being brought. They say this is as a result of increasing interference by Beijing. Now, there's no doubt, actually, Foley, that during the past few months we are seeing a doubling down of Beijing's efforts to try to contain the protests that, of course, began here in Hong Kong last June, but began to sort of peter out in early January when COVID-19 took effect here. Well, Hong Kong now appears to have COVID-19 under control, but what it doesn't have under control, quite clearly, are the protests. They have resumed again. There is a resurgent movement, but the protests have been much smaller. But Beijing wants those protests to stop. It's run out of patience with Hong Kong. And, just a few days ago, the new head of the Central Liaison Office here in Hong Kong, who's very close, by the way, to President Xi Jinping, said that it was time for Hong Kong to enact a national security law that would make protests very difficult to happen, that would restrict further protests. And these 15 are standing up to that, and they are now going to, I think, pay the price, because if they are found guilty, they could face anything up to 5 years in jail.
And the protests haven't been just on the streets of Hong Kong, Adrian. It was quite the scene earlier inside Hong Kong's Legislative Assembly.
Yeah, it's a reminder of just how fractious and broken, in a way, Hong Kong's parliament is. I mean, rival legislators were literally physically wrestling each other to the ground. There was a fight on for the control of Hong Kong's parliament, and it's all over the appointment of a chair for a key committee which has to basically pass important legislation, or present rather legislation to Hong Kong's parliament. But there's been a backlog in the last few months. No legislation has really been able to be processed. And the pro-establishment camp decided, in a sense, to take matters into their own hands. And there was this clash inside Parliament. Not a very edifying sight. 14 legislators from the pro-democracy camp were ejected. A security guard was injured. One legislator was also injured. Now, why does all this matter? Because in Hong Kong in September, there are going to be elections for the Legislative Assembly, and it's quite possible that some of those members from the Democrat Party who were ejected from Parliament on Monday will now be disqualified.
Thank you very much for that. Adrian live for us there in Hong Kong.